I used to believe love could survive anything. I was wrong, and it took me most of my life to admit it. My name is Daniel. I'm 65 years old, and this story still tightens my chest when I tell it. For decades, I thought loving someone deeply was enough to save a marriage, a family, a future. I held on to that belief even when everything around me was quietly falling apart. I'm sharing this now because someone watching might be standing where I once stood. By the end of this story, you'll understand why love alone can't fix what honesty, growth, and courage refuse to face. I was 24 when I met her, and I remember the exact moment because it felt like time leaned in closer to listen. We were standing in line at a small diner just off Route 9, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted burnt no matter how many creamers you added. She laughed at something the cashier said, and it wasn't a polite laugh. It was open, unprotected, like she didn't know yet how the world teaches you to hold back. I fell for that sound before I ever learned her name. Back then, love felt like a force, something strong enough to carry us through anything. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about expectations. We didn't talk about how we argued or what scared us or what we needed when things got hard. We talked about dreams, vacations we couldn't afford, and the kind of house we'd buy someday when life finally slowed down. We thought love would figure out the rest for us. We married fast. Faster than our families expected. Faster than wisdom would have suggested. But when you're young, speed feels like confidence. And confidence feels like certainty. I told myself that if two people loved each other enough, they'd naturally grow in the same direction. I didn't realize that love doesn't steer. It only fuels. The first few years were good. Not perfect, but good. We struggled, sure, but struggle felt noble then. Like we were building something meaningful together. I worked long hours. She stayed home when the kids came. We slipped into roles without ever discussing whether they fit. I assumed silence meant agreement. She assumed patience meant understanding. Neither of us checked when tension started to creep in. I brushed it off. I told myself this was normal. Love means staying, I thought. Love means enduring. When she started pulling away emotionally, I doubled down on affection instead of asking questions. I brought flowers instead of listening. I apologized without changing. I loved harder, believing effort could replace growth. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I slowed down enough to really look at us, I wouldn't like what I saw. Afraid that love might not be the safety net I'd always believed it was. So I stayed busy. Busy with work. Busy with providing. Busy with being needed in ways that didn't require vulnerability. Years passed quietly that way. Not happy, not broken, just slowly thinning out. Like fabric worn soft by time, losing strength one thread at a time. We became experts at avoiding the real conversations. The ones that start with, I feel, and end with silence. The ones that could have changed everything if we'd been brave enough to have them earlier. By the time I noticed how far apart we'd grown, it felt too late to ask how it happened. She had learned to live without leaning on me. I had learned to measure love by sacrifice instead of connection. We were still married, still polite, still functioning. But something essential was missing, and neither of us knew how to name it. I told myself this was just what long marriages looked like. That passion fades, that companionship replaces intimacy, that stability is its own kind of love. And for a while, that story helped me sleep at night. Until one evening, when she sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes steady, and said the words that cracked everything open. She said she felt alone. Not recently, not sometimes, but for years I wanted to argue. I wanted to list everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every long day. every responsibility I carried for us. I wanted to say love should count for something, that it should be enough, but the look on her face stopped me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusing. It was tired. And in that moment, I realized love hadn't failed us. We had failed love. Asterisk, she said she didn't know who she was anymore, and she didn't think she could find herself while staying where she was. The words didn't come out sharp. They came out careful, like she was afraid they might break if she said them too loudly. I remember nodding as if I understood, even though my chest felt hollow, like the floor had dropped out beneath me. I thought loving her meant holding on. I didn't yet understand that sometimes loving someone means letting them leave. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt heavier than shouting ever could. We moved around each other gently, like people sharing space in a hospital waiting room. I kept thinking love would reassert itself if I just stayed patient. If I proved, one last time, how much she mattered to me. But something fundamental had shifted. Love was present, yes, but it was unsupported. An unsupported weight always collapses eventually. When she finally moved out, the house felt enormous and unfamiliar. Sounds echoed. Time stretched. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to being a husband, a provider, a man needed by someone else. Without that role, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. Love had given me purpose once, but it had also allowed me to avoid asking harder questions about myself. I spent months replaying everything in my head, looking for the moment I could have saved us if I'd acted differently. I thought regret would teach me something. Instead, it just kept me stuck. It wasn't until I stopped asking how to fix the past that I began to understand the lesson buried inside it. Love isn't a substitute for communication. It doesn't replace emotional responsibility. It doesn't heal wounds you refuse to acknowledge. Love is powerful, but it's not magic. It doesn't grow on neglect. It doesn't thrive on assumptions. It requires participation. Two people, choosing again and again to be honest even when honesty feels dangerous. I had loved her deeply. That part was real. But I hadn't listened deeply. I hadn't grown alongside her. I had mistaken consistency for commitment and endurance for intimacy. And by the time I realized the difference, the distance between us had already solidified into something permanent. Healing didn't come quickly. It came in small, uncomfortable realizations. In therapy sessions where I learned how often I avoided emotional language. In quiet mornings where I noticed how rarely I'd asked myself what I needed instead of what was expected of me. In conversations with my children where I finally admitted I didn't have all the answers. Over time, I stopped seeing the end of my marriage as a failure of love and started seeing it as a failure of awareness. Love was there, but it had been carrying too much on its own, and nothing survives that forever. Today, at 65, I don't believe love isn't important. I believe it's essential, but it's only the beginning. Love opens the door. What keeps people together is what they do after they walk through it, the conversations they don't avoid, the habits they examine, the courage they practice when comfort would be easier. If you're watching this and you're still inside a relationship that feels strained but salvageable, don't wait for love to fix it for you. Love won't speak up when you stay silent. It won't change patterns you refuse to see. But if you pair it with honesty, humility, and effort, it can become something strong enough to last. And if you're watching this from the other side of loss, know this: it's never too late to learn. It's never too late to grow. Love didn't fail you. It taught you something you weren't ready to understand before. That lesson didn't come cheap, but it came in time to change the rest of my life.